I had no idea that the photographer's call that morning would unravel everything. The moment I picked up the phone, the weight of the world shifted on my shoulders. Mr. Shaw, this is Greg. I'm the photographer from your son's wedding. I I need you to come down to my studio right away. It's about your daughter. Don't say anything to her yet, but you need to see this. I felt the blood drain from my face. My daughter. Sarah. The wedding was only a month ago. Everything was supposed to be perfect. My son, Thomas, had married a wonderful woman, Erica, and the day had been filled with joy and hope. I could still see Thomas in his tux, waiting at the altar. He looked at Erica with so much love in his eyes. And then there was Sarah, my youngest, sitting in the front row, so proud of her brother, so full of life. But now, in a single sentence, Greg had shaken everything I thought I knew. Sarah? What's wrong with Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. I can't explain it over the phone, Mr. Shaw. You need to come in person. Greg's voice was strained, a hint of panic behind his words. Please, as soon as you can. The chill in his tone sent a jolt of fear through me. I barely thought before I grabbed my keys and drove out of the house. The drive from our home in Connecticut to Greg's studio in the city felt like hours. The road stretching endlessly before me. Every minute was one more piece of my piece unraveling. The moment I walked into the studio, Greg's face was paler than I had ever seen it. His usual calm, professional demeanor was gone. His eyes were wide, the words barely escaping his mouth. Mr. Shaw, Greg paused, his hands trembling as he gestured toward the projector screen. I've been going over the photos from the wedding, and I noticed something. Something I didn't catch the first time. It's about your daughter. He clicked a button, and the first image appeared on the screen. A beautiful, candid shot from the reception. There was Sarah, smiling, surrounded by friends. She was laughing, carefree, full of joy, as she always was. But then I saw it. A shadow. A figure standing in the background, just out of place. At first it looked like a blur, but then Greg zoomed in. There was a man, standing too close to Sarah. His face was partially obscured by the crowd, but his eyes were locked on her. He was watching her, intently. His body language was wrong, predatory almost. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't anyone I recognized. And worst of all, it looked like he'd been there for a while, like he'd been watching her all evening. The first wave of panic hit me like a punch to the stomach. My daughter had been vulnerable, and I hadn't seen it, not even during the wedding that I thought had been perfect. Greg continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I checked the other photos, and he's in a few more. I went back through the footage, and he's always near Sarah. But here's the thing. He wasn't invited. I don't know who he is, Mr. Shaw, and I think you need to know. I felt a surge of nausea rise in my throat. My daughter was the last person I would have expected to be targeted. I'd raised her to be strong, independent, confident. And yet here was a man, someone I didn't know, lingering at her side in the shadows, watching her. I wanted to storm out of the room, rush back to Sarah, demand answers from everyone. But the man in the photos, his presence, his gaze, kept me glued to the spot. There was something wrong here, something dangerous. Greg looked at me, a guilty expression on his face. I didn't want to say anything, but I had to show you. I think he's been following her. I'm sorry, Mr. Shaw. I wish I had caught this sooner. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized how close Ethan, Thomas's best friend, the one I had trusted most, had been to the situation. Had he seen this man? Did Thomas know about him? But before I could speak, Greg clicked to the next slide, and my stomach turned. It wasn't just the man that was troubling me. it was what the next photo revealed. The background was clearer now. The man was no longer just a shadow. He was standing beside Sarah, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. And then it hit me. This wasn't the first time I'd seen that man. That was Richard Millstone. I froze. The name echoed in my head. Richard Millstone. The name I had last heard years ago when I had helped a friend with some legal trouble years before Thomas had met Erica. He was tied to a shady business deal I'd long forgotten, a man whose face I had only seen in old news clippings. And yet somehow, this man had wormed his way into my family's most intimate moment. Why? Greg, you have to get me everything on this man. Every photo, every video. Where is he now? How long has he been around? I demanded. Greg nodded. I'll dig deeper, but, Mr. Shaw, you need to prepare yourself. What I'm seeing, it doesn't feel like an accident. This man is too familiar with your daughter, and he's not just some stranger. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. The first horrifying realization was settling in. This wasn't a random encounter. Whoever Richard Millstone was, he was targeting Sarah. The weight of that truth hit me. My daughter was in danger, and I had no idea how deep the threat ran. Do you have any idea how he got so close to her? I asked Greg, my voice tight. He shook his head. I think this man knew exactly what he was doing. He's been planning something, and I don't think he's finished. The call I received later that night changed everything. Erica, my daughter-in-law, was in tears. They've been threatening us, Victor. I think it's connected to Sarah's past, something we never knew about. We need to talk. What had Erica uncovered? What past secrets were buried, waiting to be exposed? The mystery was only beginning.
I never thought I'd be the kind of person to dismiss warning signs, yet here I was, in a studio with Greg, staring at photographs that shook me to my core. This wasn't just about a stranger lingering at my daughter's wedding. This was about a past I thought I had left behind, one that was coming back to haunt my family. But before that phone call, before the photographer's discovery, everything had been perfect, or so I thought. I remember sitting at the dinner table the night before Thomas's wedding, my wife Helen bustling in the kitchen, preparing her famous lasagna, and Sarah, my sweet, bright Sarah, laughing at some inside joke with Thomas. That evening, everything felt right. There was no shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. We were a family, and for once, life felt like it was on an upswing. Thomas had just closed a big deal at work, his first real success since joining the family business. He was happy, confident, and excited for his future with Erica. I was proud of him, proud of how he'd turned out. Watching him that night, so eager to begin this next chapter of his life, filled me with hope. Sarah had always been different. While Thomas was the ambitious go-getter, Sarah was the sensitive soul. She had this quiet way of seeing the world that made her a little more observant and a little more vulnerable. She hadn't been in many serious relationships. She was too cautious, too reserved for that. I always thought it was because she didn't trust easily, and I couldn't blame her. People can disappoint you in ways you never expect. I noticed it at the wedding too, though I didn't think much of it at the time. There were moments when Sarah would glance at her phone or her smile would falter for just a second before she would look up and force herself to join the group. But she's always been a little withdrawn, focused on her career, her art, her charity work. I'd assumed it was just stress, excitement, the usual pre-wedding jitters that we all go through. It wasn't until I saw the pictures Greg showed me that it clicked. Sarah hadn't been herself that day. She'd been distant, distracted, almost nervous in a way I'd never seen her before. And then there was Ethan, my son's best friend. I trusted him, had known him since he was a teenager. He'd been around for years, always so charming, always the life of the party. I'd never seen a hint of darkness in him. He was part of the family. Hell, he was like a son to me. What I didn't know, what no one knew, was that Ethan was the person who had brought Richard Millstone into our lives. Somehow he had tied my daughter to the very thing I had worked so hard to protect her from. And the worst part was, he had no idea what he'd unleashed. Or worse, he did. I didn't learn the full extent of it until later that night. I was sitting in the living room trying to process what I had just seen at Greg's studio when my phone buzzed. It was Erica, Thomas's wife. Her message was brief but urgent. "Victor, I need to talk to you. It's about Sarah. I think something's wrong." I didn't hesitate. I called her back immediately. "Erica, what's going on? Is Sarah okay?" Her voice cracked on the other end, and that fear in her tone made my heart drop. "It's not Sarah, not directly. It's about Ethan. I don't know what to believe anymore, Victor. I think there's something you need to know about him, something from his past." Her voice trailed off as though she were weighing each word carefully. "Ethan?" I repeated. I was in shock. "What about him?" I didn't want to say anything, but now I have to. The day after the wedding, I was going through some of Thomas's old things looking for wedding receipts, and I found a few things I didn't understand. Old business papers. They were tied to Ethan. I don't know how he's involved, but Victor, he's been hiding something dangerous, and it's not just about Sarah. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, but I couldn't process it. Dangerous? Ethan? "Erica, slow down. What exactly are you saying?" "I think Ethan has been using Thomas, manipulating him for something. He's way deeper than I thought. The whole time I thought he was just a part of the family, but now I'm not so sure. And I think he's got something to do with this Richard Millstone, the man from the wedding. It doesn't make sense, but Victor, this isn't just about Ethan anymore. I don't know how deep it goes." The walls closed in on me. My hands clenched into fists and my throat tightened with frustration. How could I have missed this? The truth hit me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't turn away from it. Ethan had been in the shadows, manipulating everyone around him, and somehow Richard Millstone, a name from the distant past, was connected to my daughter's life. Greg had unknowingly shown me the first piece of the puzzle, but Erica's call had cracked it wide open. Richard wasn't just a stranger. He was a ghost from my past, a man I thought had disappeared after a financial scandal years ago. He had disappeared from my radar, but I'd never forgotten the trail of destruction he left behind. And now, somehow, he was involved with my daughter. Sarah was involved in something bigger than she knew, and it was about to destroy everything. I was standing in the hallway staring at the wedding photos on the wall when it hit me. I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. My daughter, my family, they were at risk. I couldn't let this go. But then came the question, what should I do next? Do I confront Sarah, tell her everything and risk shattering her trust? Or do I dig deeper, uncover the truth, and take matters into my own hands? I could walk away from this, pretend I didn't know, let it all fall apart, but I knew I couldn't. By the time I confronted Ethan, I had already uncovered the secrets he had been hiding for years. But the truth I was about to discover wasn't just about him. It was about my daughter, and it was too late to stop it. I woke up the next morning feeling like I was suffocating in my own house. The familiar walls of my Connecticut home, the place where I raised my children, where I thought we'd built a fortress of trust, felt like a prison. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the events that had unfolded in the past 24 hours. Ethan, Richard Millstone, the wedding, Sarah. My daughter was at the center of it all, and I had failed to see it coming. I thought I knew my family inside and out. How could I have been so blind? I tried to shake off the dread that clung to me as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched cup of coffee. Helen, my wife, had gone to the store, and Sarah had retreated to her room, probably still processing the wedding's after effects. It wasn't just the usual post-celebration tiredness anymore. No, this was something else. My daughter was unknowingly embroiled in a mess I couldn't fully understand. The sound of the front door opening made me flinch, and I glanced up to see Helen walk in with bags from the grocery store. Her face softened when she saw my expression. "Victor, what's wrong?" she asked, placing the bags down. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stood up abruptly, rubbing my face, trying to find words. "I've seen something that's tearing our family apart, Helen, and I don't know how to fix it." I walked over to the counter, where the wedding photos still lay in disarray. Ethan's face staring back at me, the man I had trusted like a son. My anger started to bubble up again, but it was a quiet, controlled fury. "Do you remember when you first met Ethan?" I asked Helen. She smiled softly. "Of course. He was just a boy, full of energy. You always liked him. You said he reminded you of your younger self." "And now?" I bit out the words. "Now I find out that he's been hiding something connected to that man, Richard Millstone, and my daughter's future. He's been using her, Helen, using her." Helen's face turned pale. She looked at the photographs. "What's this about?" I told her everything. About the photographer, the man in the background, the shady ties to Ethan's past. I could see her processing the words, but it was clear she was struggling to make sense of it. I could barely make sense of it myself. "I need to know how deep this goes," I said, more to myself than to her. I had already decided. I was going to find out everything, every little detail. The truth was out there, and I had to uncover it, no matter the cost. The emotional rock bottom. Later that evening, I tried to do something normal, something that would distract me from the chaos swirling in my head. I sat down with Helen and Sarah for dinner, forcing myself to act like everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The weight of it all pressed on me harder than the weight of the world. As Sarah poked at her food, her face drawn in exhaustion, I couldn't help but wonder, had I failed her? Was she caught up in something she couldn't escape? I had always prided myself on being a good father, a protector of my children's safety and well-being. And now the person I trusted most was the one who was involved in this nightmare. I felt sick. My stomach churned with guilt and anger. As the dinner table fell silent, I couldn't even look Sarah in the eye. The truth was too painful. How could I protect her from a threat I hadn't even seen coming? Helen tried to break the silence. "Sarah, are you okay, sweetheart? You haven't been yourself lately." Sarah looked up from her plate, her eyes hollow. "I'm fine, Mom, just tired. I guess I've had a lot on my mind." Her mind. My heart tightened. I wanted to ask her about the photos, about Ethan, but I knew I couldn't yet, not until I had all the facts. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't shake the images from the wedding. That man in the background, Richard Millstone. I had no idea how he had gotten so close to my daughter, but I was sure of one thing. He was the key to understanding everything. My mind raced, replaying moments I had ignored before. Ethan's increasing involvement with the family business, his friendly gestures, his manipulative charm, his presence at every family gathering. He was always there, just a little too eager, just a little too close. But I had missed it all. I had trusted him. I had let him in. And now, because of my blind trust, my family was at risk. I couldn't allow this. I wouldn't. The next day, I took matters into my own hands. The house felt empty without Helen and Sarah, who had gone out for the day. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the drawer where I kept my old files, papers, receipts, contracts. I dug through them, searching for any clues that could point me in the right direction. And then I found it. A business deal. A loan agreement from years ago, signed by Ethan and a name I didn't recognize at first, Richard Millstone. They had been partners in a shady deal, something to do with land development that had gone south. The deal was buried in legal jargon, but there it was.
Ethan had been using my family's trust to cover up the traces. The documents showed that Ethan wasn't just a bystander. He was involved in Millstone's scams. He had used his relationship with my son to gain access to our financial accounts, pulling strings in ways I couldn't even comprehend. My blood ran cold as I realized how far this web of lies stretched. I sat back, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. The shock was overwhelming, but it also gave me clarity. I had my first lead. Ethan wasn't just manipulating my daughter, he had been manipulating all of us. I stood in my study, the documents spread out in front of me like a roadmap to hell. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted, had been a lie. I had two choices. I could go to Sarah and tell her everything, or I could confront Ethan and get to the bottom of it all, once and for all. I didn't know how Sarah would react if I told her. She was already fragile, vulnerable. She would feel betrayed by everyone around her. But could I protect her without telling her the truth? Could I shield her from the man who had manipulated her and my entire family? I looked at the photo of my children on the wall, smiling at me with that innocent joy from years ago. It seemed like a lifetime ago. I realized then that I had no choice. The time had come. Ethan had betrayed my family, and I wasn't going to sit back any longer. He had made his choice, now I was going to make mine. I thought confronting Ethan would be the hardest part, but what I discovered about his involvement with Richard Millstone turned my world upside down. And the real shock, I wasn't just fighting for my daughter anymore. I was fighting for my family's legacy.
The next few days were a blur. I moved on autopilot, my mind consumed by thoughts of Ethan, Richard Millstone, and the tangled mess they'd created. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, and the weight of what I had discovered grew heavier with every step. I couldn't waste time. I had to act. But what did I really know? I had pieces, fragments of truth, scattered across the floor, but nothing concrete enough to take Ethan down. I needed more. I needed to know just how deep this went. What exactly had Ethan been planning? How far had he gotten? That afternoon, I found myself standing in my study, staring at the stack of documents. I could feel the pulse of urgency building inside me. I'd already started digging into Ethan's past dealings, but now I needed more than just paper trails. I needed to understand the person I was dealing with, the man who had once been my son's best friend, someone I had trusted with everything. I needed to find out who Ethan really was. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Greg," I said when he picked up, "I need you to dig into Ethan, and I need you to do it fast." Greg, the photographer, was a man of many talents. He had a knack for getting people to talk, especially when he was armed with the right questions. I had known Greg for years, and while he had been the one to uncover the first piece of the puzzle, I needed him to go further. I couldn't waste time on half-truths. Not anymore. "I'm on it," Greg said after a beat. "I'll start looking into his past contacts." "But you're sure about this? Ethan is involved in some pretty shady stuff, Victor. The man has connections I wouldn't want to mess with." "I don't care," I snapped, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know everything. Dig up whatever you can." Greg hesitated, then responded, "I'll get back to you in the next 48 hours. I'll dig deep. You've got my word." I hung up, already plotting my next steps. It wasn't enough to wait for Greg's investigation to unfold. I needed to gather more intel. My next move would be critical. If I could expose Ethan and his relationship with Millstone fully, then I could have the upper hand. The first piece of my plan was simple. I needed leverage. I had already uncovered the financial documents, but there was still something missing, a personal connection, something that would tie Ethan directly to Millstone. I called an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't seen in years, Tom Sullivan, a lawyer who had handled some of my earlier business dealings. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, but Tom owed me a favor or two. "Victor," Tom said when I reached him, "it's been a while. What's going on?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tom, I need you to pull a file for me."
It's an old business deal, something that Ethan was involved in years ago. I need to know who he was dealing with, who was backing him up. Richard Millstone's name might be in there. Can you get me the documents?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "I'll have to look. Give me a day or two." I didn't hesitate. "Do it. I'll pay for the rush. We need to stop Ethan. He's been involved in something big." There was a long pause before Tom spoke again. "I don't like where this is going, Victor, but I'll get it to you." As I hung up, I felt a sense of progress, but it was fragile. One small piece of evidence was not enough. I needed the full picture. I needed to find the missing link that would tie Ethan's betrayal to everything. 2 days later, I found out that Ethan had been celebrating his supposed victory. He had been bragging about securing a large real estate investment deal with a company I had never heard of. I knew instantly that something was off. He was acting like he had won, as if everything had gone his way. I decided to pay him a visit. I needed to see for myself just how confident he was. It wasn't the typical Ethan I was used to. His usual arrogance was there, but there was something darker beneath it. His house was larger than I remembered, lavish, over the top, and the pride in his eyes as he showed me around made my blood boil. "Good to see you, Victor," Ethan said, flashing his signature grin. "Things are really looking up for me. Things are going my way." I tried to hide my disgust. "It looks like you've been busy," I said, keeping my voice steady. He laughed, showing off his newly renovated kitchen. "Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Big things are coming, man. Big things." I nodded, forcing a smile. I didn't care about his new kitchen or his inflated ego. I was here to find the cracks, to figure out what he was hiding. And what I saw made my blood run cold. A set of legal papers lay on the table, documents tied to Ethan's business dealings, and in the corner of the page, I saw it. Richard Millstone. The decision point. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. Ethan had done it. He had tied himself to Millstone, and now he was trying to buy his way into the family business. This was no longer about money. It was about power, control, and betrayal. But the truth wasn't enough. I had the evidence, but it was only part of the puzzle. If I confronted Ethan now, it might only push him further into hiding. I needed to act carefully. If I played my cards right, I could take everything from him. The trust, the respect, the power. And that's exactly what I planned to do. But as I left Ethan's house, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about teaching Ethan a lesson he'd never forget. And that lesson was going to cost him everything. The next time I saw Ethan, he wasn't alone. There was someone with him, a face I hadn't expected to see, someone I thought was long gone. And the moment I realized who it was, everything I thought I knew came crashing down.
The next time I saw Ethan, it wasn't in the comfort of his new over-the-top home. No, this time things would be different. I'd gotten too close. I'd seen too much, and he knew it. It was a Wednesday afternoon, just a few days after my visit to Ethan's house. I was still processing the weight of what I'd uncovered, the connection between Ethan and Richard Millstone, the old business dealings, the manipulation. I'd expected him to keep his distance, to play it cool, but he didn't. He had something planned. I got the call at 2:30 p.m. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized Ethan's voice when I picked up. "Victor," Ethan said, sounding unnervingly calm. "I think it's time we had a little chat. Meet me at the old warehouse by the docks. You know the place." I knew it all too well. That warehouse had been used for years by small-time business owners, a place to store inventory, meetings, nothing flashy. But Ethan was never a small-time guy. I could tell by his tone that this wasn't just a casual meeting. "You've got something to say, Ethan?" I asked, my voice steady, but inside, my heart was pounding. "Let's just say I think we both know how this ends.
"Come alone, Victor. You don't want to bring your daughter into this," he added, with a cold edge. I didn't answer. I hung up, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. There was no turning back now. The game had shifted. It wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. It was about taking control. I arrived at the warehouse about an hour later. The silence of the place hit me first. Empty, abandoned. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing in the dim light. It felt eerie, like a place where decisions were made and lives were ruined. I stepped inside cautiously, my eyes scanning the shadows. And then I saw him. Ethan. Standing with his back to me, casually leaning against a metal beam. He didn't turn around when I approached him. Instead, he spoke. "You're finally here. Took you long enough," he said, his voice cool, too composed for the situation. He was trying to maintain control, but I could feel it. He was nervous. "You're the one who called me here, Ethan," I replied, my voice low and steady. "You wanted to talk, so talk." He turned slowly, the smug grin on his face never fading. But there was something wrong. His eyes. They weren't the eyes of the man that I had known. This wasn't the Ethan I had raised to be like family. This was someone else entirely. "You really thought I'd let you walk away with all this, didn't you?" Ethan laughed, almost as if this was some twisted game. "You thought you could just uncover my secrets and walk off into the sunset with your little family intact?" I narrowed my eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You're too blind, Victor," he said, stepping closer, his voice low and threatening. "It wasn't just about your daughter. It was never about her. She was just the easiest target. No, what I'm really after is everything you've worked for. The business, the wealth, the control. I've spent years getting close to your family, all to take what's rightfully mine." I felt my blood boil. He's been planning this for years, I realized. He had never been a friend. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing waiting for the right moment to strike. "Ethan, you've crossed a line," I said, my voice colder than I felt. "You've used my daughter to get to me. You've manipulated this family, and now you're going to pay for it." He smirked. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor. You should have learned by now that there's no stopping me. There's only the end." Before I could react, Ethan reached into his jacket, pulling out a small envelope. He threw it on the floor between us. "This is the last warning you're going to get, Victor. The papers in there? Well, let's just say they'll make sure your little family business doesn't last much longer." My heart sank as I reached for the envelope. As I opened it, I found what I was looking for, more evidence of Ethan's betrayal. But it wasn't just any document. It was a legal document, binding me to Richard Millstone in a deal I'd never agreed to, a deal that gave Ethan rights over a portion of the family business. "You've been playing me this whole time," I said, my voice now tinged with disgust. "You were never my friend. You were just a man with a plan." He grinned wider, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I've been waiting for you to realize it. You were always in the way, Victor. Now you're just a pawn in my game." But the thing Ethan didn't realize, what he couldn't see, was that he had made a fatal mistake. He thought he had won, that the game was over, that the family was done. What Ethan didn't know was that I had already set my own plan into motion. I had been working with Tom, the lawyer, to secure the evidence I needed. The same documents Ethan thought would seal his victory would be the very ones that would bring him down. What Ethan failed to understand was that he was never going to be the one in control. I had been one step ahead the entire time. As I looked at Ethan standing there so sure of himself, I realized how wrong he was. His false victory wouldn't last long. The world he had built on lies, deceit, and manipulation was about to come crashing down. I stepped closer to Ethan, my eyes locking onto his. "You've been deceiving my family for years, but what you didn't count on was me, Ethan. You underestimated me, and now you'll pay for it." I wasn't acting out of anger. No, this wasn't just revenge. This was about restoring balance, about teaching Ethan the lesson he desperately needed to learn. "I didn't destroy you, Ethan," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "You destroyed yourself." Just when I thought Ethan was cornered, something happened that I didn't expect. Richard Millstone wasn't just a pawn in Ethan's game. He was the game changer. And now, everything was about to get worse.
As the echo of Ethan's words lingered in the air, a tense silence settled between us. He stood there, visibly agitated, the self-assurance that had once defined him, now replaced with palpable fear. It wasn't just the betrayal of trust anymore. It was the realization that I knew exactly how deep his lies went, and worse yet, that I had already moved my pieces on the board. "Victor," Ethan said, his voice unsteady, "you don't understand. Richard Millstone, he's not just some businessman. He's not someone you can just—" I cut him off, stepping closer. "It's over, Ethan. You think you're the one pulling the strings, but you're wrong. Millstone isn't the threat you think he is. You are." Ethan's face twisted into a mask of disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom how quickly everything was unraveling around him. You're bluffing, Victor. You can't touch me. I've already won." I shook my head. "You don't get it, do you? You are the one who's been played. Richard Millstone, he's your puppet master, not the other way around. And I know exactly how he works." In the hours after the confrontation, I sat in my study, staring at the evidence I had gathered. My mind couldn't stop racing. The more I thought about Ethan's arrogance, the more I realized how much damage he had caused. He had brought Millstone into our lives, manipulated my daughter, and used her trust to further his own twisted ambitions. He wasn't just a traitor, he was a parasite, feeding off my family's legacy. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with my lawyer, and late-night conversations with my son, Thomas, who had just begun to realize the full extent of what had been happening. "Dad, I had no idea Ethan was capable of all this. How could I have been so blind?" Thomas said, his voice filled with regret as he paced the living room. I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him. "You didn't know, Thomas. We all trusted Ethan. That's on him, not you. But now we know the truth, and we're going to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else again." I had spoken those words to comfort my son, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. Ethan was a symptom of a deeper problem, one I had only begun to understand. But as I looked at my son, I knew I had to protect him and the rest of my family, no matter what it took. In the days following the confrontation with Ethan, I found myself standing in front of the mirror more often than usual. The person staring back at me wasn't the same man who had left for the warehouse the other day. The betrayal had changed me. For years, I had lived in the background, always there for my family, doing what was expected of me. But now, I had stepped into a role I never wanted, a role I had to embrace if I was going to protect the people I loved. It was a strange feeling, this power I had uncovered within myself. I was no longer just a passive observer in my own life. I had taken control of the narrative, and it was a choice I was going to see through to the end. I wasn't just going to expose Ethan. I was going to make sure his lies cost him everything.
The more I reflected on it, the more I understood what had driven me to this point. I wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. I was protecting my legacy, my family's future, and most importantly, Sarah. Ethan had tried to take it all away from us, but I was going to make sure he paid the price. As I sat there in the quiet aftermath, I thought about everything that had happened, about how quickly everything had fallen apart. It was like a house of cards. Ethan had been so sure of his victory, thinking he had manipulated his way into everything we had built. But in the end, it was his own arrogance that had led to his downfall. The lesson I learned wasn't just about Ethan's betrayal. It was about the importance of trust and the devastating consequences when that trust is broken. You can't rebuild trust just because someone says they're sorry. You rebuild it with actions, and sometimes those actions are painful. I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, can never be restored with mere words. Ethan had destroyed that trust, not just with me, but with my family, with everything I had built. And now, it was time for him to face the consequences. Just when I thought the storm was over, I received a message from Richard Millstone. It wasn't a plea for mercy, it was a warning. This isn't over, Victor. You've made a powerful enemy. But what I uncovered next about Millstone's own plans turned the entire game on its head. It was no longer just about revenge, it was about survival.
The days that followed Ethan's downfall felt strangely quiet. The storm that had torn through my family's life had subsided, but there was a strange unease that hung in the air. I was waiting for something. I didn't know what, but I knew it wasn't over. Ethan was out of the picture, yes, but Richard Millstone? He was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I could feel his presence even from miles away. I was in the study, staring at the stacks of documents that had piled up over the last few weeks. Legal papers, financial records, and incriminating photos of Ethan and Millstone. I had to admit, it felt like I was assembling a puzzle, one where every piece I uncovered made me more certain that Millstone wasn't just a businessman, he was a puppet master, and I had been Ethan's puppet. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. That's when it happened. The phone rang, cutting through the silence of my study. I glanced at the caller ID. It was an unlisted number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. What if it was a trap? What if Ethan had someone working for him still? "Victor Shaw," I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a voice I immediately recognized. Richard Millstone. "Victor," his voice was smooth, calm, almost mocking. "I'm sure you didn't think I'd let this go without a fight." The hair on the back of my neck stood up, but I kept my composure. Richard Millstone was a man who had spent years hiding in the shadows, but now he was speaking directly to me. This was the confrontation I had been waiting for. "You should have known better than to mess with me," I said, my tone as cold as I could make it. "But you've underestimated how far I'm willing to go." He chuckled again. "Oh, I'm not underestimating you, Victor. I know exactly how far you're willing to go. But you don't understand, do you? This wasn't just about Ethan or your family. This is much bigger than that." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" There was a pause, a deliberate silence before he spoke again. "You are in my game now. You've taken down Ethan, but you've forgotten about the bigger picture. What happens next, Victor, is entirely up to me. You have no idea what you've really started." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Richard Millstone wasn't some petty criminal. He was someone with a far-reaching plan, a man whose power stretched beyond my wildest imagination. I thought back to everything I had learned in the past few weeks. The documents, the bank transfers, Ethan's ties to the shady real estate deals. And then it clicked. Millstone was connected to more than just Ethan. He was tied to an entire network of people in power, people who had been pulling strings in the shadows for years. I needed to know more. I needed to get deeper into Millstone's world. I grabbed my phone and immediately called Greg. Greg, listen closely. I need you to dig into Richard Millstone and not just his business dealings. I want to know who he's connected to. I need you to find out everything. There was a brief pause before Greg responded, his voice full of determination. I'll get started right away. You've been onto something bigger than you know, Victor. Millstone isn't just about money. He's part of a much larger game. I know, I muttered, my thoughts racing. Millstone had threatened my family, my legacy. He had used Ethan to get to us, and now he was speaking to me directly, challenging me. I wasn't about to back down. I had a choice. I could continue playing Millstone's game, trying to outsmart him from the shadows, or I could go to war. The thought of walking away, of letting Millstone win, felt impossible. Ethan had already destroyed our family's trust. I couldn't let Millstone finish what Ethan had started. I had to protect my family, no matter the cost. I'm going after him, I whispered to myself, my voice steady with resolve. As I prepared to face Millstone, I received a shocking piece of information from Greg. Millstone wasn't just targeting my family. He was going after something much bigger, something I couldn't have prepared for. And what I found out next was a game changer. I wasn't just fighting for my family anymore. I was fighting for everything.
The moment I hung up the phone with Greg, I knew this was it. The final leg of this journey had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Millstone wasn't just a man I needed to take down for betraying my family. He was a force, a shadow that had been lurking for years, manipulating everything around me. What I didn't know, until Greg uncovered the information, was that Millstone wasn't just involved in small-time fraud and shady business deals. He was entangled in something far larger, something global. Greg had found evidence that Millstone was connected to a network of powerful figures, people whose names you wouldn't hear in the news, but who controlled industries, governments, and economies. It was a web that spread like wildfire, spanning countries, industries, and interests. Millstone was a central player in a high-stakes game that I had unknowingly walked into. And now, he was coming for everything I had. I wasn't just fighting for my family anymore. This had become bigger than me. This was about survival, about taking back control. I had always considered myself a family man, a businessman, but as I stared at the map of Millstone's operations, spread across continents like a spider's web, I realized how naive I had been. Millstone wasn't just about greed. He wanted power. Complete, unyielding control over everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let that happen. I contacted Thomas and Sarah, telling them I needed to meet. They both arrived at my office an hour later, looking concerned, their eyes searching mine for answers. "Dad, what's going on?" Thomas asked, sitting at the desk across from me. "You've been acting strange lately." "Thomas, I need you to listen to me," I said, my voice firm. "Millstone is not just a businessman. He's dangerous. He's been using us all as pawns in a much larger game." Sarah's face went pale. "What do you mean? How deep does this go?" I looked at both of them, trying to hide the fear I felt. "It's deeper than we thought. He's been behind Ethan's manipulation of this family. He's tied to criminal organizations, corrupt officials, and people who have the power to destroy everything we've built. If we don't act now, we're not just fighting for our family, we're fighting for our lives." The room was silent for a long moment. Thomas leaned forward, his jaw set. "What do you need us to do, Dad?" "I'm going to confront him," I said, determination in my voice. "But I can't do this alone. I need you both to stay close, keep your heads down, gather what information you can, and be ready for anything." The day came sooner than I expected. Millstone had been in the background long enough. It was time to end it. I arrived at the address Greg had found.
a seemingly innocuous office building in downtown New York. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I knew Millstone would be prepared for this. He always was. As I entered the building, I felt the familiar tension grip me. This wasn't a place for business meetings or casual handshakes. This was war. Millstone was waiting for me in the penthouse suite, a cold, sterile room with glass walls and sleek, minimalist furniture. His back was to me as I entered. He didn't need to turn around to know I was there. "You finally came," Millstone said, his voice smooth, calculated. "I was wondering how long it would take you to figure it out. But you've done well. Too well." I felt my chest tighten. "This ends today, Millstone. You've destroyed enough lives, and I'm not going to let you ruin mine any longer." He turned slowly, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You think you've won? You think you've uncovered all my secrets? You've only scratched the surface, Victor. Everything you fought for will be mine soon. This isn't just about money. It's about control." I took a step forward, my hands clenched at my sides. "You're wrong, Millstone. You've played your game, but I'm not playing anymore. I'm taking you down." He laughed, a low, almost mocking sound. "You're too late, Victor. You can't stop this now. I've already won." His words echoed in the room, but I didn't flinch. I knew he was bluffing. What he didn't know was that I had one last card to play. As I reached into my jacket pocket, I pulled out the documents I had gathered over the past few weeks. Everything I needed to bring him down. It wasn't just a simple expose anymore. This was proof. Bank statements, records of illegal transactions, ties to international crime syndicates, and even government connections. The moment I slapped the documents on the table, Millstone's expression shifted. He wasn't laughing anymore. His eyes darted over the papers, panic creeping into his features as he realized what I had. "You... How did you..." His voice faltered. "I told you, Millstone," I said, my voice low and calm. "You've been exposed. This is over." His eyes flickered with something I hadn't expected. Fear. Richard Millstone, the man who thought he was invincible, was now cornered. The power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. "What happens now?" Millstone asked, his voice strained. I smiled, a cold satisfaction flooding through me. "Now you face the consequences of your actions. You thought you could control me. You thought you could control my family, but you were wrong." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered all the pain he had caused, the lives he had ruined, the family he had almost destroyed. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice. "I'm not the one who's going to ruin you," I said, my voice steady. "You've already done that to yourself." The room fell silent. The power had shifted completely. Millstone had no more cards to play. Just when I thought it was over, Millstone dropped one last bombshell, something that turned everything on its head. The truth about Ethan's betrayal, that wasn't the end game. It was just the beginning.